Good morning. Hope you all have your coffees with you and ready to go this morning. It's been a good TechEd week. My name's John Papa, and hopefully you're here to hear about KnockoutJS and MVVM with JavaScript. We'll be talking about that in the context of using it with some of the ASP.NET templates. Today we'll talk about how you can use Knockout to create some really nice, rich web applications. And you can combine that with ASP.NET, either web forms or MVC, or actually you can use Knockout with none of those and just use pure client-side application development. So Knockout is an application library written in JavaScript by Steve Sanderson, originally, who's now with Microsoft. He was not with Microsoft when he wrote it originally. Lives in the UK, great guy, very smart. He built the application thinking, I'm a web developer and I wanted to have something richer on the client to be able to make the plumbing of pushing and pulling data inside of HTML and JavaScript applications much easier. So the concept there was, we've got this thing called XAML over in the WPF and Silverlight world, and we've had data binding and other technologies. How can we bring that to JavaScript and HTML to reduce a ton of plumbing? And I'll show you what some of that plumbing can look like when you do it with things like jQuery, which is a great library, but there's things that you can do better and easier and faster. So we're going to show you how you can bring some of that great data binding richness to the JavaScript world. So first, what is Knockout? It gives you that rich client interactivity, as I mentioned. It also lets you use the MVVM pattern, which is a model view model pattern. If you don't know what that is, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to show you how to use data binding. Whether you want to use this pattern or not, that's fine. But it's going to help you understand that when you do the data binding between your JavaScript and your HTML, basically what we're doing is the view. When I say view, that means a screen or a HTML page. When I say view model, I'm really talking about the JavaScript that goes to that page. So it's just a fancy way of making yourself sound smarter, right? Do I sound smarter yet? No? Okay. So after that, we'll get into how you can actually use the MVVM to build really cool applications, and I'll show you some demos. And if you're wondering, can my browser use it? Well, I'm pretty sure that your browser can support Knockout, because if you're using something less than IE6, you probably don't belong in this room. So I'm pretty sure everybody here has got IE6 or up. Anybody here not have at least IE6? Okay, no wise asses either, huh? All right, so in Knockout, there's three main things. Now, if you went to my spa talk yesterday, I guess I should ask, how many of you here were at my spa talk, single-page apps, yesterday? About half? Okay, cool. So I went through Knockout pretty quick yesterday. I'm going to slow down and expand on it today and how that works, because really, once you get into spa development, people always ask me, how do I get started? The first thing I tell them is understand JavaScript. And once you get past the basics of JavaScript and how they work, and how you're going to structure your application, and I'll show you some tips along the way on that too, then I say, well, if you're going to go the data binding route, learn Knockout first. There's a lot of libraries that help you with different things. But some of the libraries all rely on Knockout. For example, when you build a single-page app, and you use something like Durandal, which is a nice framework for building single-page applications in JavaScript, it actually depends upon Knockout. And that's a good thing, because Knockout has really become one of the high standards of how to do data binding in web applications. So before we get into Durandal and things like that and other frameworks, good to understand what am I gaining from Knockout. And there's three core pieces in Knockout we're going to look at. First one's the observable. In the .NET world, we have something called iNotify property change. And iNotify property change is an interface we can apply to classes in C# or VB that allow us to communicate between the properties of those classes and to the UI. What does that mean? That means when a user types in a value in a text box, it's automatically going to save that value into the backing model, the view model. And then when the model changes, maybe SignalR updates it from some backend service, or an AJAX call updates it. When that model changes, it synchronizes it with the UI. How great is that? We don't want to have to worry about pushing and pulling data back and forth. So observables let us do that in Knockout. And then for those times where you want to create your own property on the client that might not necessarily be an actual property, like it doesn't have a backing store, it's more like a calculated field. For example, like a grand total on a shopping cart. Then you can create a computed. A computed is a calculated field. And the final one is the observable array. That's going to allow us to have a list of items. And you can make this like, it's kind of akin to the observable collection in the XAML world. So if you come from XAML, observables are kind of like the iNotify property change. And then the observable array is kind of like the observable collection, where every time you add something to that array, it'll automatically show up in the UI. Imagine its array is bound to a data grid. And then when you remove something from that array, it'll delete it from that UI. And vice versa. If the user adds or removes things from the grid, if it's data bound to an observable array, it'll add or remove things. So these are the three core pieces that lets us get going Knockout. If you understand these three things in Knockout and how they work, you're going to have 80% of Knockout covered. There's a lot of really cool holes you can go down to do some really powerful things in Knockout. But at its essence, Knockout is data binding. So how do you do Knockout? Well, first, you go get the library, right? And I'll show you where you get that on NuGet, or you can go to KnockoutJS.com. So once you get it and you want to use it, you want to put something into the UI. So here we have an HTML element as an input. And the one thing that's out of place here is this data-bind attribute. The HTML5 spec says basically, if you want to enhance the DOM with your own properties and attributes, do it with data and then make your own property name. That way, they're basically saying, we're never going to add an attribute to an element that starts with the word data so we don't overwrite and collide with you. Because in the past, before that was the case, some of the libraries out there were just making up their own attribute names. And what if somebody came up with an attribute called placeholder? When HTML5 came out with that, there would be a collision. So in Knockout, they say data-bind. The Knockout library looks for that and says, OK, the developer wants me to bind a value called code to this input. The two parts of the data bind are the binding and the value. The binding is the word value in this case. What does that mean? It means that that's how it should bind to this element. It should bind the value part of the input. Because it's an input, we can enter values into a text box. And then we want to go look for a property called code. Imagine this is like a session at TechEd. Go find code DEV123. And it's going to put it in this field. Notice it hasn't yet told it what object to bind to. That's OK. We'll get there. So in the JavaScript, hopefully in another file, we've got something declared as your view model. And in my view model, maybe I've got a property like first name and code and a bunch of other property names. Those properties can then get bound. And that first name, for example, let's assume that was first name up in the input. That is what gets bound up into the UI. So when you do this, basically you have a view model that's got your properties, and then you've got your inputs or what other elements you want to use, like spans and divs, that are going to reflect and point to those. And the glue that ties them together is this method down here called apply bindings. You say KO, that's for Knockout, apply bindings, and there's two parameters you need. One, if you omit, is what part of the DOM do you want to bind to? If you omit it, it says bind to whatever's on the screen right now, the whole HTML document. And by default, that's what it'll do. If you want to override that, you just pass in what part of the DOM you want. The other one is, what do you want to bind to? That's the part I said we're getting back to. So that's the MyViewModel. I created this object called MyViewModel. It's got some properties in it. And then I'm going to bind that to my DOM. So then I don't have to, when I do my binding, go myviewmodel.code. I can just say code. It knows what it's bound to. And as you might suspect, you can bind different sections of your DOM to different models. So maybe you have a dashboard, and each element in the dashboard has a different view model. And you can even nest view models. In its simplest step, these are the three things you need to do Knockout. And the most common thing I forget when I first do demos in Knockout is I'll type all my data bindings in, and then I'll type all my view models in, and all my properties. And then I forget to do the last line. And I'm like, why isn't anything working? And there's no errors. It's because I didn't tell it to do anything. So always make sure you do the apply bindings. So I glossed over a piece that was in there called the observable. This is that property I mentioned earlier that we define with Knockout. Knockout properties can be either plain old JavaScript objects, or they can be observables. The big difference here is the observable gives you the ability to notify the UI, whatever targets, when I say targets, I mean the HTML elements, to notify those targets when something changes in your model. And then when something changes in the UI, those targets, it's going to go and get reflected back in the source too, which is going to be your JavaScript. So if I have a title here and I want to bind that to an HTML element and put the title into it so somebody can type it in and change, I'd want an observable so I can get those changes immediately. So here we've got a screen and I've got this element up here called title. And if I want to change that title, I want to bind that to this observable from my view model. And then the HTML might look something like this. So I've got this div there, and I've got a title, and I'm data binding the value for it to the word title. And again, don't forget your apply bindings. So if you do those things together, this will automatically just update. So one of the things I like to go back and look at when you get into Knockout is a lot of people will talk about new technologies, and this has been around for a couple of years now, but I really despise when people say, here's a new technology, use it, it's cool, without telling you what you did before and what you get after. So what would you do without this? If you had, let's say, a screen with, let's say, 50 fields on it, because nobody writes screens with 2 fields on it, right? At least not a lot of apps, other than login screens. If you've got a screen with 50 fields on it, you're going to get into 50 different properties from some AJAX service. You're pulling that up to your JavaScript. And then when it gets to your JavaScript, you're going to have to go through each property and then map it with a line of jQuery probably. Say, go get that value for first name, stick it in this HTML element. Next, go get the property for last name, stick it in that HTML element. So on and so forth. 50 lines of code. And then, when somebody presses save, you're going to have to go write those same number of lines of code, say, now go back to that HTML element, pull it out, and stick it in your JavaScript object. Well, if you've done any .NET, which I'm sure most of you have, that really would be painful, because we have tools that do that kind of stuff for us. Well, Knockout saves us from writing those 100 lines of code, 50 to pull and 50 to push, by allowing us to do data binding and control how that data flows. And it makes it immediate if we want it to be. It also helps solve problems like, when do I want validation to occur? Maybe I want this field to automatically validate as soon as it loses focus. You'd have to write code to do that without something like Knockout. With Knockout, you can actually bake those kind of things in. So that's what you're gaining from Knockout. It's not giving you something you couldn't do on your own. It's just making it tremendously easier, which I kind of like. It lets you build the application instead of worrying about the plumbing. So the way that the observable works is the changes to the source, your JavaScript, is going to notify the target. And vice versa, anything that changes in the target is going to notify the source. That's basically HTML to your JavaScript. You're going to get two-way data binding by using an observable. It's going to automatically update both ways. And you can bind to events. This is actually cooler than the XAML world, in my opinion. In the XAML world, we had to use things like behaviors and commands and delegates and things like that to do data binding. In JavaScript, we can bind any element in the HTML over to any property or method inside of the view model, which means I can bind the click event for a button directly to some goSave method in the view model. I don't have to worry about behaviors and things like that we had to do in the XAML world. So that's kind of cool. Let's take a quick look. Oh, well, let's take a look at this one, then we'll go look at the demo, because I want to show you the before and after. So here we've got a list of people in an array. These are going to be read-only. Notice that they're all like images and addresses, things that you're not going to edit. And notice I've got this for each binding. So it's not just values. I've got text and for each here. Text is going to say, it's not the value, I'm just going to display the first name and last name. They're not going to change it. And it's going to automatically update the UI. And then the for each is saying, that speakers thing, it's got to be something I can iterate over. So speakers is probably an observable array. So for every item in the observable array, I'm going to change the context inside of that section. The article's context will be each individual speaker. So then I can just say, go get the image name, first name, last name, which is kind of cool. And then when it pops out of that section, that's basically a loop, then you're back on the context of the data context for the page. So think of the data context for the page as the view model. And then, inside that section, the data context changed to each individual item for the speaker. So what do you do if these things are editable? Or as I commonly call them, editable. Here we've got a title, like we had earlier, and notice I've got dot syntax too. So here I've got the session title. That implies to me that the context for this page, the view model, had a session property, and that session property happened to be an object. And that object has a property called title. So now, if I want to dive into an object graph, I can do that. I don't have to flatten my objects or anything. I can actually dive in by using the dot notation syntax, which makes that really, really easy. And can we do drop-downs? Absolutely. So drop-downs, we might say, all right, go get all the tracks for my event. Windows 8, .NET, COBOL, whatever those tracks might be. And then we can bind those to the list, and then the selected value is going to be session.track. So we've got a whole bunch of options by doing this. Let's go look at a demo on how this works. And I'll make this available on my blog, which I'll give you a link to at the end. It's at johnpapa.net. I probably have way too many windows open, so let me start closing a few. And let's run this one here. All right, so first we've got a demo. It's no binding versus using Knockout. Up here I've got the same thing on top of each other. Basically I've got a binding for a name of a guitar and its sales price. And this one's not using Knockout, and the one below it's using Knockout, but not using that observable thing that I mentioned. Now, when I change the Taylor guitar up here to like a Martin, there's no actual changes happening under the covers. I'm not actually changing anything. These are raw objects, and I can use it with jQuery or I can use it with Knockout. So I can change this down here as well. And what's happening under the covers, if we look at this code, is I've got this object called product. And notice it's a plain old JavaScript object, Pojo. And there's my values in it. And I'm using that same object for both demos that we just saw. The first one uses a jQuery and says, go find the guitar item number, which means I also have to, in the HTML, tell it where is that guitar item number, and then put inside of its text the product item number. Now, again, this demo has 3 fields. Most real apps don't have 3 fields. So imagine yourself writing this over and over and over again and mistyping the magic string right there. One of my most famous mistypos is that. I'll do that and stare at it for about 10 minutes some days, going, why can't it find the thing? Yes, I've been doing that for 6 years. He cannot be taught. So the next step, that's the jQuery. That's all I got to do, right? 3 lines. In Knockout, all I have to do is say, you know what? Go find that product and bind it to the page. That's it. Why? Because as I scroll down the page, here's the jQuery example. The span has an ID, the input has an ID, and so on and so forth. But in the Knockout example, I've got data bind right there. It says, go find that value and bind it. So there's 2 things really important about this demo. First, jQuery, while it's great, is not as efficient as Knockout at actually pulling the stuff in, and it's not as powerful because Knockout will go both ways for you between the 2 elements. The second thing, which is a little more subtle, is notice the object is not using observables. I just said make item number be this string. That's how it's going to come across the wire from Ajax to you as well. You're going to get JSON. It's going to hydrate yourself into a JavaScript object like this. And then if you want, you can just display these values purely this way. You do get data binding without the observable. Let me be very clear. You get data binding, but you don't get full-blown data binding. What I mean by that is, by using this example here, when I change the value for the item number of the model and the sales price in the UI, it's going to update that object, and vice versa. So I'm going to go ahead and load the object once and save it back to the target, but what I'm going to lose is, if there's other things bound to that source object, they're not going to be notified. So that's an important part. Really, if you need that 2-way data binding, you need to use observables. If you're doing like one time or one way, perfectly fine to keep it as plain old JavaScript objects. And the reason I say this is, if you're only doing one-time binding where you just want to display the values and leave them there, it's actually faster to not make it an observable, because any more code you run it's more code. So if you're just displaying data, like for a read-only list of items, just leave them as plain old objects if they're not going to change. So what would it look like if we didn't do that? Well, John, I'm glad you asked. So right here in the second example, we've got observables. Looks very similar, but now we're going to show the object literal, which is what we did last time, versus using an observable. So up top here, I've got this Taylor 110, and then right here, that value, that's bound to the same thing. So I've got a span that's data bound to this value, and I've got an input. So as I change Taylor here, what's going to happen? Nothing, because it's a plain old JavaScript object. When I change this one down here, what's going to happen? My new guitar model is the John Papa model. And down here, I'm bound to the same thing. Notice what happened. Automatically notified the other property. Let's take a look at that code. So here we've got a product. We have product 1 and product 2. This time we have 2 product objects because the first one's using plain old JavaScript. The second one is using observables, which means that if I'm using an observable, anything that's bound to these properties is going to be notified whenever it changes. So down here I've got my apply bindings, and I still have the same old data bindings that I have at the bottom. Each way the HTML looks the same. That's kind of cool. My HTML didn't change. The only thing that changed was I took the JavaScript objects that were coming in and I converted those to using observables. Sweet. All right. This is probably the simplest slide you'll ever see. And there's a purpose for it, believe it or not. That's actually my cat's name, by the way. So, yeah, we can't spell in my family either. So, observables. They've got this funky thing that hangs a lot of people up. Anybody see what that funky thing is? Parentheses. When you're used to setting properties, usually you're used to saying name equals cat. Right? In observables, you have to say name parentheses cat. Why? Because observables make it into a function. What you're doing is you're saying name is going to be an observable. That means that name is actually going to be a function. And to read the function, you read it with parentheses without passing a value in. And to write to it, you pass a value in to the function. So when you want to get the value out of an observable, you need to unwrap them. Unwrapping means get the value out of the observable function and just show me the word cat. So how does this work? You've got to use a parentheses to unwrap it. So you read values like this. Let's say I create an observable called name. I can initialize it by setting it equal to the value Haley. Or, if we wanted to, we could just do something like we had here, where later on we say name and put a cat in there. And then we can actually put out to the console the name. What's happening here? That's actually the function definition. If I say console log name, name is actually a function. What function? The observable. It's a KO observable. If I want the value, I have to do something different. I have to do name parentheses. I have to unwrap it. Everybody likes Christmas, right? You want to unwrap your presents. You don't leave them in the box and say, look what you got, it's a new Xbox. Look at your Xbox. You have to unwrap it. So that'll get you good stuff. And when you set values, likewise, I'll see this common mistake. All right, let's go ahead and set name to Ella. That'll work. What if we set name equal to Ella like that? Now, we've actually done something worse than the first bad example. Now we're setting name to no longer be an observable at all. Now it's just a string called Ella. And in the JavaScript world, you can set a variable to any type and just change it all the time. So it's not going to be an error. It might cause an error later in the program, but in this case, you're going to redefine name from an observable to a string. So the moral of the story is, love your parentheses. Unwrapping observables, keys here. You want to unwrap them. You want to unwrap that function in your code by using the parens so you can get to the value. Excuse me. You can use that dot syntax like this, where you've got sessions.length or session.firstname or whatever else the properties might be. One of the keys here is in your HTML, there's a nice rule about the parentheses, where the rightmost property, you don't have to use the parens. So I don't have to say image path, open, close parens. In the HTML declarative binding, Knockout does a nice thing for you. It says, anytime you put the word that you're data binding to, like when we did code or first name, I know that's supposed to be an observable. I'm going to automatically unwrap the parenthesis for you for the rightmost property. I still have to use the parentheses for everything else in there because it doesn't know which ones are observables, which ones aren't. So I have to say speaker, that's an object, it's an observable, parens, dot, first name, last name, image path. So in this case here, I've got people length. That'll work fine. And notice here all the rightmost properties like people and name and age. No parens required in the HTML. But if I dive down to address city, then I do require those parens. Anybody know why we need the parens at all? Why can't we just set properties? JavaScript and many browsers support ECMAScript 3 or ECMAScript 5. We skipped over 4. Kind of like the bad Star Trek movies, we just jump right over them. There was no ECMAScript 4. So ECMAScript 3 doesn't support something called getters and setters. So we have getters and setters in a lot of languages, like .NET. ECMAScript 5 does support getters and setters. So if the whole world became ECMAScript 5 related, you could actually use Knockout without using parentheses with a plugin that Steve Sanderson, the guy who wrote Knockout, has. You can go check it on the Knockout website. It'll allow you to use Knockout observables without the parentheses. But because there's still quite a bit of the world using ECMAScript 3-based browsers, we have to use and support using the parentheses. That's the only way to actually get to those values. Otherwise, a plain old object, JavaScript does not make plain old JavaScript objects observable by default. There's no way to do setter and getters without those. So it's actually called the observer pattern. And it's not something Knockout invented. It's something that has been around for a while. So now we understand how Knockout works with this, with the observables. How do you do a computed? Well, computeds allow you to derive your own properties based upon other observables. And they can actually be quite powerful. And you can read calculated properties or even write to them. Now that's cool. So you can actually create what's known as a converter in other technologies, like Silverlight. You can create a computed, which will calculate a value out of the database, show it on the screen differently, and then let the user change it. For example, let's say in the database you store the hex values for colors. You have the hex value comes up as a string. You want to display it as actually the color inside of a square on the screen. And then let the user change that value through like a drop-down or a color picker. The user doesn't want to type in hex, they want to choose the color, red, blue, green. Well, to get that value to be converted, you could write your own code to do that, or you could write a computed, which says take the hex value, convert it to a color, return that, and bind it. And then when somebody selects the value through a color picker, you want to change it, you could actually make the computed write back and say, all right, I know the color now, let's turn that into hex so I can save it. So you've got a read and a write with a computed. Some pretty common ones here. Here we've got a regular observable, and we've got an extended price computed. So up top, we've got the quantity and the sale price. Pretty common in a shopping cart scenario, you're going to want to say, how much does this cost? Take the extended price and say, make that be equal to if I have a product. If I don't have a product, return 0. Shopping cart should say, you don't owe any money. If I do have a product, go get the sale price and multiply it by the quantity. Now, what's neat about this is any time this computed runs, so the first time it runs, let's say the shopping cart is empty. There are no products. It knows it's only going to run, it's going to short circuit and say, only run this product. It's going to remember, I just evaluated this .product. That's the observable I evaluated. It's going to remember that. And then it's going to return the value 0. Now, whenever product changes, Knockout's going to say, hey, you know what? Somebody was listening to you, and the last time this extended price evaluated, it evaluated product. Now that it's changed, you need to reevaluate extended price. So it's smart enough to know, don't reevaluate all the time, only reevaluate when an observable that I've actually just executed its code has changed. Notice I didn't mention sale price or quantity yet. That's because the first time in, it's only going to evaluate product, because there were none. So it's only going to remember and track product. And then, once there is a product, it'll actually evaluate sale price times quantity and return that. And then when any of product, sales price, or quantity change, it'll reevaluate the computed again, which is what you want. So as people update their shopping carts and change prices, it's automatically going to reflect in the UI. And by default, there's 2 overloads you can pass into the computed. The first one is just give me a read function, meaning I'm not going to allow the user to write back the extended price. That'd be kind of bad in a shopping cart. Nah, I don't want to pay that. Let me type this in. So I only want them to be able to read the value. I pull in the sales price and the quantity, and I show them how much it costs. So by default, I can just pass in the function for reading it. The other option I have is I can also pass in an object literal and specify 2 functions, a read and a write. But if you just want read, you can just simply pass in the function. So here is a cool scenario for using computeds. We want to detect when changes are made and when users can save data. So let's create a computed called hasChanges. And it's dependent upon some other third-party library. We'll just call it the data context. And it has its own observable called hasChanges. When that data context has changed, Then it's going to update this hasChanges methods computed here, so I know, do I show that little asterisk over there in the corner or not? So I can bind the visibility of that asterisk to the hasChanges computed. What about saving data? I don't want them to actually enable the save button, or the cancel button for that matter, unless they've actually made changes. So I can create a canSave computed. And the canSave relies upon two things. First, do you have changes or not? And if you do, and it relies upon another computed, notice that this computed actually depends upon another computed. And it's also got to be not in the middle of a save. I've created another observable that's going to detect you're already in the middle of a save, so I'm not going to let you save and go like this and crazy on the buttons. It's call it my dad syndrome. John, it's not working. What are you doing, Dad? Nothing. So here we've got two observables that it's depending upon, and when either of those changes, it's automatically going to update and then enable or disable the buttons for us. So computers aren't just for showing values, they're also for detecting state inside your application. I use them quite often for that. Let's take a quick look at example there. So we've got this app, which I just wrote 4 seconds ago. See how fast I write? And here's our app, and we've got a session. And as I'm changing the data here, notice I got cancel is disabled, save is disabled, delete is enabled. I want to be able to delete it if nothing's been changed here. And there's no asterisk on the right. If I change the title of this to, You All Love This, and I tab out, a couple things changed. 4 of them, in fact. Cancel and save are now enabled, based upon that computer we just saw. Delete is disabled. I don't want to let them delete if they're in the middle of a change. That's just a rule I have. And then there's an asterisk over here for hasChanges. And if I cancel, the state goes back to where it was. So computers can be very powerful for doing things like this. And if we look at a simpler one, I have way too many demos open. All right, there we go. Come back here. Here we have that extended price. A couple things we're noticing. One is whenever it reevaluates, this is a nice debugging tip. Whenever you reevaluate a computed, sometimes I like to make sure I'm not evaluating it too often or not enough. I actually throw an alert to the console or using a library I wrote called Toaster just during debugging to see what's going on. Notice here it evaluated the extended price once, and that's that value right over here. Now, as I change the value, I want to buy that guitar. It's really cool. And you know what? I'm going to buy one for everybody here. Notice as I typed, 1, 2, 3 reevaluations. I did not jump out of the box yet. I have not lost focus. There's 2 reasons for this, that it changed 3 times. One is the default behavior for Knockout is to automatically update the observables after you lose focus. But you can change that. So as the user types, it automatically updates. It's a little more expensive because it's on every character. But that's perfect for things like filters. Like a type ahead. Somebody starts typing in and you want to filter something as they go. So you can do that. And then the other thing is every time it changed, it let the computer know, reevaluate yourself, which is why I got all 3 of those toasts. So as I delete, you'll also see that happen too. And then I can change the price. I really don't want to pay that much. I don't have that kind of money. Let's make it $1, and then I'll buy one for everybody. Well, maybe not. Here. Now I will buy one for all of you. It's on me. Cool. So let's come back over here. Sorry? I can show it. Would you like to see it? Let's show you the HTML where the asterisk was there. I was on the session detail screen. So let's open up its HTML. And way up top, I've got a header. Oh, come on, guys. You can't see behind me? There we go. At least you tell me. I've been in demos before where people don't tell you when you're not showing the screen. And then you're just looking at them and they're like, then you know you're asleep, All right, so at the top I've got this header bar. And just to show you what we're looking at, let's go back to the demo. So we're looking at this right here. First, I've got my title right up top. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Then I've got my go back, cancel, and save and delete session. And at the bottom, you'll see an asterisk. I'm using an icon. That's a class to put that asterisk there. And data binding, the visible binding to has changes. Not very difficult code, right? Pretty easy.
The visible there is very specific to Knockout network, right? Can you set, for example, a specific CSS property?
Absolutely. You can absolutely set your own CSS property as well. Generally, I'll show you some demos of that because we have that coming up too. I recommend creating your own binding if you're going to reuse it. You can actually create your own binding called the John Papa binding and then set it to a property too. And the reason for that is it makes it more reusable. If you're going to set multiple classes, it can get kind of long and lengthy. So I'd like to keep my HTML kind of trim. So once I end up with a bunch of bindings, generally I'll make my own like super binding. And I'll show you how to do that because it's really, really cool. And it's actually kind of easy. But yes, you can bind to CSS classes, or you can actually bind to a style too if you want to. So the third of the triumvirate of observables is the array. And they can track which objects are in the array. They don't track the objects themselves, they track which ones are in it. So if you want the objects themselves to be observables, you can do that. If you don't, you want it to be a read-only list, but only know when items are added or removed, like a shopping cart, then you could just do plain old JavaScript objects in an observable array. And whenever items are added or removed, it'll automatically let the UI and vice versa know. And you can use all the array functions with this too. So all the push and pop kind of array functions and splice and dice. There is no dice. But you can go. Okay, only 2 people caught the pun. So you can do those too in the arrays. How do you define it? Notice here I've got an observable array of plain old JavaScript objects. So the objects themselves are not observable, but the array is as I'm adding these guitars to my array. So I'm pre-populating them in this case. You can add them later too with push or pop. And then I just bind to like products. And I can say products.length to show how many items are in a cart, or I can do a for each binding through the products. And you can operate on that. Well, let's take a look at some array stuff because some really cool things you can do with arrays. So in our demo, not that demo. Okay, way too many demos again. Let's go back here. I think this is the one I want. And I will make these available to you. I have a few demos to show. We've only got 60 to go through. You got time? So observable arrays, pretty easy stuff here. We've got 18 products. That's going to be a product's length. Right here, we've got individual products all listed out. And I've got a bunch of functions I can do. I can remove one. Let's say I don't want this Koa one in there. That's a really cool guitar, but let's remove it. As soon as I remove it, it disappeared from here. And notice the products went down to 17. Let's see that again. Get rid of the baby Taylor. It's gone. We can also add an item in here. Let's add in the Papa guitar. Now it went up to 17. And there it is at the bottom. I can also sort using regular array functions. So Papa should be up there somewhere. Where am I? There I am. And then we can delete me. So how does that work? Inside the HTML here, we can see we've got our objects. Oops, wrong one. We've got our objects here. And then we've got down below the list of arrays. So we've got this products, and we're pushing into it a new object. Right there, that's a product constructor. It's kind of, sort of, almost like a class. JavaScript doesn't have classes. What a product is, it's a constructor to create an object. So we're going to see this product guy right there. We're creating this function called product, and the syntax we use in JavaScript is a capital letter to designate that that's going to be a constructor for creating objects. So I'm going to create more than one of these. And that object's going to create things, a sale price, photo, item number, so on and so forth, all with observables and computeds. So if I go back to my array, after I go get my data out of products, I'm going to loop through it, and I'm going to push into the products array the product. And I'm going to pass in, this is the way I'm converting. I'm basically mapping my JSON, plain old JSON object into an observable object. So now I put those values in there, and then I've got like my add item. Somebody wants to add an item. I was calling this code to say, go ahead and push into it, new product, and then I put in the description. Remove. I can go ahead and remove the object by saying remove all, that's a clear, or remove the selected one. So you can use all the different little functions like sorting, array functions that automatically exist on arrays. And then you can pass in how to sort it with a compare function. Well, let's see something cooler you can do with arrays. When you're using arrays, a common mistake I see people make is they will take a list of items. We've all got that user screen somewhere in our application where we've got something like 1,000 items that the users insist they must see all 1,000 items on the same screen, or 10,000. Well, let's say you loaded up an array of 10,000 items onto the screen. As you're pushing into the array, for all 10,000 of those, every time you push or pop to or from an observable array, guess what happens? An event notification telling the UI and the targets, hey, something changed. So every time you do that, it's running a little code to make it observable. Well, what's going to happen here is, let's say, right here we've got this add people, and right now we've got an array with a single object, Scott Guthrie. We're going to stick Scott in our array. I'm going to add 4 people by clicking this button to our array. Watch what happens over on the right-hand side. And now it's 2, 3, 4, 5 records. 4 events. Okay, the speed was pretty darn quick right here, right? Now make that 10,000. I saw an app that I was working on once, came in and debugged it, and the biggest issue they had was it was like 10,000 rows, and they were doing this, and the screen was taking about 11 seconds to load. We changed it by doing this one change, and it got it down to sub-second. So let's clear out the people, and now instead of adding just Scott, we're going to add better people. Adding people better. So, we love you, Scott. So we're going to add people better, and this time, notice we only had 1 alert. It's magic, right? No. And here's the data on the bottom. That's what we added. What we're actually doing is saying, with the observable array, remember, it's just an observable. It's a function. I can unwrap that observable array and get the underlying array out. So what I do is I first say, I'm going to load 10,000 rows. And when I do that, before I do it, go grab the underlying array, the actual JavaScript array, not the observable array, and then fill that. Because when I fill an array, a normal array, there's no event notifications going on. And then when I'm done filling that array, I just stick it back into the observable. One event notification. Tons of performance improvement. I don't believe you, John. Well, you just saw it happen. So let's go ahead and look at, not him. Let's see, is it this guy? Yes. So here's the difference. Here's adding people. Notice I'm doing push, new person, for each one of these. And that could just be a loop. And that's going to make 4 notifications. Down here, there's 2 extra lines of code. But the first line says, go get from people, give me the array. Stick it in a variable called underlying array. And then I'm pushing the same people into that. And then at the end, I tell that observable array, something in you has changed. And it goes, oh, okay, I'll let the UI know. So I don't even have to put it back in the observable array. I just have to tell the observable array, I changed your contents under the covers while you weren't looking. Go let everybody know. That's kind of cool. It's like somebody put $100 in your pocket without you knowing and goes, hey, you're richer, go buy a Surface. So, all right, so we can clear the people, and we're good there. So how does all this work when you get to HTML? We just learned the core pieces of Knockout. We get a bunch of bindings built into Knockout, and we can put multiple expressions. We've seen these examples already, like text, enable, value, visible we looked at, for each. We got options or drop-downs. You can do all these bindings. These things come out of the box with Knockout. They give you these bindings that know how to talk between the HTML and your JavaScript objects. There's a bunch more. Click and event are 2 very common ones. The most common event we run in UIs is click. User's going to click something. So you can bind the click event to a method like save, cancel, delete. You can also bind event. If you want to define another event like on mouse over, on mouse out, things like that, or scroll, you can actually bind any event you want to any method as well by using the event binding. And that gives you the ability to, as the spec increases and more events are exposed in the DOM, you can now use the event and just add that event in there. We have we have disable, enable, and visible. So disable and enable are nice for buttons, like that's what I was doing on the delete button and the save button. And then visible, that's what I use for that little asterisk. There is no invisible or hidden. If you want to make something hidden, you just use the reverse of visible. You say visible bound to not, then your property, not being the exclamation. We saw text and value for like spans, divs, and then inputs. And we've got adder. Adder is the, okay, Knockout didn't create a binding for something I really need. There's some kind of attribute that I need to set on this element. But you can set any attribute in HTML through the adder binding. And I've used this commonly for there is no source for an image binding, like an image source. So what I do is you'll see adder, set the src property equal to image path. So you can do that for that. So here, we can set conditionals and for eaches and other expressions. Let's say we only want to display the items in the shopping cart if the line's length is greater than 0. We can put logic here. I don't generally recommend putting logic in your HTML, but you can do it. And in fact, we could shorten this code very easily. We could just say if lines.length. We don't have to say greater than 0. Because in JavaScript, if the line's length is going to return the length, which will be 0, and 0 is a falsy expression in JavaScript, and it just won't execute that line of code between the two p tags. So what happens is the browser will not even render the code in between there. And then when the line's length changes, it will re-render it. This you have to be careful of. If the line's length was going to change a lot in your application, this would be inefficient. Because if you're going to add and remove, every time that that expression changes from true to false, it's going to add or remove parts of the elements from the DOM. And DOM reflow, which is the act of actually adding elements to the DOM and taking it away, is expensive in all browsers. So if you just wanted to hide or show it, a better way is instead of using the if, would be to use the visible binding. Let it go ahead and bind to visibility. It's much less expensive to hide and show things than it is to add and remove. For each, we looked at this earlier. We're going to loop through all the sessions, and then inside of there, we basically created an inline template. This is a data template where we say, all right, repeat this article for every session we have. And I've got in here my time slots, my levels, my tracks. I'm diving into objects. Here you can see I'm using the adder to get the source for the image. And it's going to repeat that code. So in my HTML, I type this in, and then what actually gets rendered in the browser is for every session, I get that article repeated over and over again. Let's take a look at that one real quick. So in our demo for this, and by the way, there's a live link for this. You can run this on the web. There's also a link where I can point you for the source code for this application. You'll see a ton of Knockout in it. In here, I've got 94 sessions online. And somebody changed my wife's session to who dat gonna beat them Saints. My wife loves it when I put her picture here. Not. So let's go ahead and inspect that element. Inside of here, we can see there should be an article. There's the article right there. Scroll back up a little. So we're on that. You notice there's a whole series of articles being repeated. That's because the section above it has a for each sessions. Now I'm going to give you another tip here. I'll show more of this later, but as you're looking through the elements in Chrome, there's a really cool Chrome plugin that you need to have. It's the KnockoutJS plugin. It's not that one. It's over here. If you select an element, on the right-hand side, you see this thing called Knockout Context. Right now I'm selected to an article, the first one. And as I change, notice it's showing me all the properties that that object has. The level's advanced. The title is Windows 8 form factor. And now as I change to a different one, notice now, who dat gonna beat them Saints is there. So as you change through there, it shows you what's in there. It's kind of nice when you're debugging to figure out, maybe I'm not bound to the thing I thought I was. So you want to grab that Chrome plugin. Okay, so what are some more custom things you can do with Knockout? There's a thing called custom binding handlers. Let's say you want to do something a little more robust. Create a star rating control, integrate with Twitter Bootstrap, integrate with jQuery UI or Kendo. Write your own debugging binding handlers. You can create any binding handler you want. What's a binding handler? Text, value, click. Those things we've been looking at, the for each. It's the left-hand side of that data bind expression. You can create your own binding handler and then tell it in logic how should it operate upon the value. It's really, really powerful. And it helps remove a lot of UI logic. There's two times that I think about a binding handler. One is when I know I want to do something really complicated with the DOM. If I want to manipulate a lot of the DOM, I'm writing a binding handler. I want to do something like update multiple things in the DOM, I'm writing my own binding handler to do it. The second case is whenever I see my data bind syntax get really, really long. If I see it get really long, I want to make a binding handler out of it so I can remove a lot of that logic and push it to a binding handler and make it reusable. And then anytime you want to integrate with a third-party widget, because all those interact with the DOM, jQuery UI, Twitter Bootstrap, binding handlers. So here is the simplest binding handler I could think of. It's called fade visible. I want to show something, but I don't just want to show it visible or hide it. I want it to fade in over half a second using jQuery's fade in, fade out. A binding handler needs two functions, init and update. Init is when it binds the first time in. It's going to run this code the first time the binding is evaluated. And the update is going to happen every time an observable changes. And you get some parameters passed in. So here's the actual code for fade visible. First parameter you get in with the init is the DOM element you're bound to, a button, a div. The second one is the value that you're bound to. That's the right-hand side of the expression, whatever value you're binding to in your view model. The third one is maybe there's other bindings on that same data bind. You can access those if you want to. And the fourth one is the whole view model. So let's go ahead and look at this binding handler. Should be right over here. So as I select each product, I want to show the product details. Let's right-click into this, inspect the element. Let's see what's going on. Notice I've got a span here, and I've got a click event on the row itself. I'm saying click, go call the selected product. Here I'm changing the CSS to set it to be isSelected, so I can actually add classes to it. We got that question earlier. And then probably inside the select product, I could be changing things. Well, what could I be changing? Let's find out. I'm going to click on this guitar because it's really cool. And notice that thing popped up, and it faded in slowly. So let's look at this guy. We'll inspect his binding. And we've got this div called product details area. And then inside of here, we've got a fade visible. I created this binding handler called fade visible, and I set it equal to an observable called can show details, which returns true or false. It's going to return back whether or not somebody has actually selected a product. And then when I exit, it's going to fade out slowly. Let's go look at this code. All right, I think that's actually down here. So the fade visible is there, somewhere in there. This file. So here's our fade visible. I'm simply saying, go get the value I bound to, true or false. Then use jQuery, and it's got a function in jQuery called toggle to toggle on, should I display this or shouldn't I? That's the initial state. Notice I'm not fading in or out there. If the app loads and an item was selected as soon as that screen pops up, I don't want that thing to fade in. I just want it to be there. But after that, if the user is clicking and unclicking things, the update should run. And in that one, I'm saying element fade in over a duration. And by default, the duration is 500 milliseconds. And then fade out if it shouldn't display. And here's that all bindings accessor. I unwrap that observable, because that's the observable. Now I go get the value. And I say, go get the duration. If they passed in something called fade duration, use it. If they didn't, set it to 500 milliseconds. So what does this mean? It means that in my HTML, if I look for fade visible, let's say I passed in fade duration, and I set that equal to a value like 4,000 milliseconds. Well, that'll be fun. Let's refresh this page, clear the cache. Refresh. Now I clicked on it, and you can really, really impress your users. This is a great tip that I highly recommend. You put in really slow fade durations for your apps, make the users think their apps are really slow. Then you go in and change the fade duration back to like 400. They're going to be like, you are a god. Then you go in there, delete a 0, refresh the page, and woo, look how fast your app is now. So the whole idea here is you can add your own parameters. So I created a binding handler called fadeVisible, and then it said, hey, look for fade duration if it exists. If not, it's going to default it. So what else could you do? Well, I'm glad you asked. Inside of this app here, Session Details, that's this app here, when we select somebody, like Pete Brown, good friend of mine, let's say I had a problem with my data binding here. I love that title. People are getting funny. So as we're in here, let's say I can't see the data binding on it. Sometimes I really want to know what the data bindings are, what I'm bound to, and I'm not using Chrome maybe, so I can't use that plugin that shows me all what I'm data bound to. There's a really, really cool way that you can basically print out the entire view model to your screen. What is that, John? Well, we're out of time, so I'll see you guys next year. No. So I wrote a binding handler called, I love the name of it, dump. And what dump will do is it'll basically do a to.json for you. So here's my binding handler for dump, and it only runs once. And what I do is I say, when you're binding to this dump handler, you say dump : and then whatever value you're bound to, it's going to create a pre-tag inside your HTML. It's going to then append that pre-tag inside of whatever element you bound to. It's going to add it to the DOM. And then I'm going to create this dump JSON. I'm going to go out and get all the JSON from the view model. So how does this work? So if we scroll to the bottom of this page, woo, I commented this out. What I did is I created a div, and I bound that div to this dump binding handler, and I said, go get $ data. Show me the money data. So money data, what that means is a knockout. If you want to know what the current context is, it's $ data. I want to get everything this page is bound to. I could also put in here, if I'm bound to something like, I think session is on here, I could do that if I just wanted the session. I can also do root. Root gets me the root of the data context of the page. Data gets me the current thing that I'm bound to. Or I can also do parent if I want to go up a level. And then I'm just putting a style here to clear it out. So what's this going to do? Let's go back to the page. Let's open up Developer Tools. We'll clear our cache. I've got an error. Let's hope that isn't going to bother us. We'll go to Scott Guthrie's page and scroll down and look at all that. Now I can see everything in the view model for this page for Scott Guthrie. For example, the title is Keynote. So somewhere down here, we can see can save, false, has changes, false. Here's all the rooms in that drop-down list. Woo, lots of rooms. Somewhere else down here, the rooms will actually end. There we go. Now there's tracks. And if we search down for the word Keynote, we can see the session, the tags, the title, the description, and even all the object nesting. Very nice for debugging. Basically created a binding handler. I could have written all this in JavaScript. I could have put all that code that you just saw in JavaScript into my data-bind. Somebody would have shot me probably, but you could do it. Now all I have to do is just say dump the data. And then when I'm done, I can just comment that back out, and it's all happy. And if you want that, there's actually, oh, the plunker died. And that one died. That's not good. And that one died. Look at that. I will show you links to live websites where you can get that code. Always have a backup plan when you present. So we looked at a bunch of cool things you can do. Binding handlers, custom binding handlers, other bindings, array performance, computeds, and observables. What happens when things go wrong? You can set breakpoints inside your Chrome browser. Commonly do this as I'm debugging things. You can use it in Firebug as well in IE, or you can use Visual Studio. I happen to prefer the Chrome browser for debugging. You can just go inside the browser, and we'll switch back over here. We've got our edit session. We can open up our details and pull it up. I can go over to the sources, or I can go over to the resources. And inside of the scripts, I can pull down my view model and say, there's session details. And let's make a little more real estate. And then I can say, all right, when this screen activates, break right there. I want to find out what's going on. Or I can say, all right, well, let's go down to the has changes, or the cancel, or save. So when I press save, or delete, I can put a breakpoint in there. We'll come down here. Now I press delete. There's my breakpoint. Now I can evaluate the different values by hovering over them. I am Steve Ballmer. And then we can also set values. We can open up the console window down here, put the value out for title, or like message. And then you can also look at the locals window over here. So you can see down here everything that's currently in scope. We can define our breakpoints. We can disable them or delete them as we need to. And you can also set XHR breakpoints, which I really like to do. So if you've got some kind of a call, you want to find out when is this page making an AJAX call to get more data, but you're not sure where it is in the code. This is something I commonly do is I inherit code. Somebody gives me some code to look at, says something's wrong, they want to know what's going on. I want to find out where it's getting its data from and when it's calling it. You can set an XHR breakpoint inside of here and then tell it, break when the URL contains something. You type in some kind of server IP address or the domain name, and it will break when it sees that happen. The code won't break, the debugger will break. That would be bad. You can evaluate observables and expressions in there. We saw that Knockout plugin that I chose to show you. So if you're using Chrome, you can use that Chrome plugin, or you can use the dump binding handler that I showed. You can modify and run and save code on the fly, too. Did you know that? You could go inside the Chrome browser and actually change the JavaScript and then save it. It won't save it to your server, but it saves it to the local cache so you can try new things without having to refresh. And then you can see those changes. So if you go back into that browser, let's jump back in, and we have no breakpoints, so let's set one inside of session detail. We'll set it right there, and let's go ahead and press the delete key again. Now I'm in there. Let's say I wanted to write some code. I just hit the enter key. I can type in var John equals awesome. And then I can right click and I can save. Save out that file right there. Or I can simply press Control S and it's going to save local modifications. And then after I press Control S, I go to local modifications and it shows me here all the changes I've made, and I can revert them back or I can save them out. So now I can say revert. Let's go revert. We get rid of those. And then go back to our page and notice that John is awesome is gone. Well, it's still there. You do not see that. But it's really cool because you can make changes to CSS or JavaScript on the fly and then save them out and test them. I do this quite often when I'm debugging. It's a lot better than having to go back to the server, change the code, refresh, blah, 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 blah. I'd love it. The feature request I have is somehow we can integrate that with Visual Studio so those two things would talk to each other better. So as a recap, the key things with Knockout are to use the observables, those three kinds, observable, observable array, and computed. You get really cool templating built in, and those templates can be driven so they load them externally from other places. So if you want to reuse a data template, you can load those in from other places too. I highly recommend taking a look at Durandal. It's a really great framework that allows you to load templates and other things on the fly using Knockout. And quite often, when you think you can't do something in Knockout, the way to go is to create a custom binding handler. Very, very helpful techniques. As promised, here's the resources I mentioned. So if you go to johnpapa.net SPA, there's about 20 to 40 different links on there for code, source code, live demos, blog posts, more reading material, and some videos that'll help you out with Knockout and SPA and Durandal. This session here and the SPA session yesterday, I think that's actually already recorded and up on the site. You can go and check those out and watch them afterwards. And please rate the sessions. We all appreciate it. And if you want more information about Knockout, I've got a 5-hour course at Pluralsight, which is my trigger to remind myself that I've got about 100 free Pluralsight cards here for a free month that you guys can come down and get after if you like. All the samples you saw are on that course. And then any additional samples I'll be posting to my blog at johnpapa.net/spa is where you'll see it. With that, if anybody has any questions, please come up to the microphones. Other than that, thank you very much.